I discovered that my father had been using my name and identity to secure fraudulent loans and hide illegal financial transactions. When I confronted him, he gaslit me, calling me overreacting and ungrateful. My family sided with him. Then, at a high-profile charity gala, I confronted my father and changed everything. I've always been the black sheep of the Bennett family. While my younger brother Daniel basked in the adoration of our parents, I, Clara Bennett, was the inconvenient firstborn. Too quiet, too thoughtful, never quite fitting into the mold of the cutthroat world my father had created. Growing up in the sprawling Bennett estate, I learned early on that appearances were everything. My mother, Evelyn, was a master of the superficial, her days filled with charity galas and social climbing. My father, Richard, was the titan of industry, his name synonymous with luxury real estate and high-stakes investments. And Daniel, he was the golden child, groomed from birth to inherit the empire. Me, I was the afterthought, the daughter who preferred balance sheets to social events, who questioned rather than blindly obeyed. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" became the constant refrain of my childhood. Each repetition a little knife twisting in my heart. I found solace in numbers. Finance became my refuge, a world where logic reigned and emotions could be quantified and controlled. By the time I was in my 20s, I had carved out a niche for myself as a brilliant financial analyst. My success a quiet rebellion against the family that had never quite accepted me. But you can't escape your roots entirely. The Bennett name opened doors, even as it felt like a weight around my neck. I told myself I was different, that I was using my skills for good. I believed it too, until the day I stumbled upon a discrepancy that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my family and myself. It started with a single anomaly in an old company file. A thread that, when pulled, began to unravel years of carefully constructed fraud. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Surely, my father couldn't be using my name, my identity, to secure fraudulent loans and hide illegal transactions. But as I dug deeper, the evidence became undeniable. The day I confronted my father is etched in my memory. His study, always a place of intimidation, felt suffocating as I laid out what I'd found. I expected shock, denial, maybe even remorse. What I got was far worse. "You're overreacting, Clara," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is business. You should be grateful for everything we've given you." Grateful. The word echoed in my mind, a mockery of the years I'd spent trying to earn his approval. When I turned to my mother for support, her response was equally devastating. "Don't make a scene, darling," she said, sipping her ever-present glass of Chardonnay. "You know how your father gets when he's stressed about work." It was in that moment, standing in the opulent study, that suddenly felt more like a prison, that I realized the true nature of my family. The wealth, the power, the prestige. It was all built on a foundation of lies and exploitation. And I, in my naivety, had been complicit. As I left the study, my world crumbling around me, I made a vow. I would expose the truth, no matter the cost. Little did I know then just how high that cost would be. The weeks following my confrontation with my parents were a blur of denial and desperate research. I threw myself into investigating every aspect of the family business, using my financial expertise to follow the money trail. What I uncovered was staggering. A web of fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion that stretched back decades. But knowledge, I quickly learned, was a double-edged sword. The more I uncovered, the more isolated I became. Colleagues at work began to avoid me, warned off by whispers from above. Friends canceled plans, their excuses growing thinner by the day. Even my apartment, once a sanctuary, felt tainted. After all, wasn't it paid for with dirty money? The final blow came at the annual charity gala. One of those soulless events where the wealthy pretend to care about the less fortunate. I hadn't wanted to attend, but my mother had insisted. "Appearances, Clara," she'd said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We must keep up appearances." I was at the bar, nursing a drink and counting the minutes until I could leave, when Daniel cornered me. My brother, always the life of the party, was slightly unsteady on his feet, his words slurred from too much champagne. "I heard about your little concerns," he sneered, leaning in close. "You know, Clara, if you can't handle how things work around here, Maybe you should just leave. You've always been a failure anyway, a burden on this family. Why don't you do us all a favor and disappear?" As he walked away, laughing with a group of sycophants, something inside me snapped. The years of emotional manipulation, the constant gaslighting, the financial exploitation, it all crystallized into a burning rage that threatened to consume me. That night, as I sat in my apartment surrounded by financial reports and old family photos, I made a decision. I would bring down the empire my father had built, expose the rot at its core, and reclaim my life. But to do that, I needed leverage. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While cleaning out my late grandmother's belongings, the only member of the family who had ever shown me genuine affection, I discovered a hidden compartment in an old jewelry box. Inside was a ledger, its pages filled with meticulous notes detailing years of my father's illegal activities. As I pored over the ledger, my grandmother's final words to me took on new meaning. "The truth will set you free, my dear," she had said, squeezing my hand with surprising strength. "But first it will make you miserable." I was certainly miserable now, but as I held the evidence of my family's crimes in my hands, I felt something else stirring hope. This ledger was the key to unraveling the entire corrupt empire, and I, Clara Bennett, would be the one to use it. Armed with the ledger and my own financial expertise, I began to build my case. But I quickly realized that I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies, people who could corroborate the evidence and help me navigate the treacherous waters ahead. My first step was to reach out to former colleagues, people who had left the company over the years, disillusioned by its toxic culture. Many were hesitant to get involved, the fear of retribution still fresh in their minds. But a few brave souls came forward, providing crucial testimony that supported the ledger's contents. It was during this time that I met Maya Torres, an investigative journalist who had been trying to crack my family's facade for years. Our first meeting was like something out of a spy novel. A dimly lit cafe, coded messages, and the constant fear of being watched. Maya was everything I wasn't: brash, fearless, with a burning desire to expose the truth, no matter the consequences. As we pored over documents in her cramped apartment, she turned to me with a look of admiration that I wasn't used to seeing. "You're incredibly brave, Clara," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Not many people would have the courage to stand up to their own family like this." I didn't feel brave. Most days I felt terrified, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every unexpected sound. But Maya's words gave me strength. For the first time, I wasn't just Richard Bennett's disappointing daughter. I was a whistleblower, fighting for justice. As our investigation deepened, so did my relationship with Maya. She became not just an ally, but a friend, the first real one I'd had in years. With her help, we began to piece together a comprehensive picture of my family's crimes, connecting the dots between fraudulent real estate deals, offshore accounts, and a network of shell companies designed to hide the true extent of the corruption. But even as we made progress, the danger grew. Twice, I caught Daniel rifling through my apartment when he thought I was out. Anonymous threats began to appear. A dead rat on my doorstep, my car's brake lines mysteriously cut. The message was clear. Someone knew what I was up to, and they wanted me to stop. It was Maya who convinced me to go to the authorities. "We have enough to bring them down," she argued. "But we need protection. These people, your family, they're dangerous." I knew she was right, but the thought of officially turning against my family made me physically ill. Despite everything, a small part of me still longed for their approval, still hoped that there was an explanation for it all. That hope was shattered the night I overheard my father and Daniel discussing plans to frame me for embezzlement. Hidden in the shadows of the family estate, I listened as they plotted to destroy my credibility, to paint me as a disgruntled daughter out for revenge. As I slipped away, my heart pounding, I knew there was no turning back. The next morning, I walked into the FBI office, the ledger clutched to my chest like a shield. As I began to tell my story to the stone-faced agents, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The die was cast, the battle lines were drawn, and I, Clara Bennett, was ready for war. The weeks that followed my visit to the FBI were a strange mix of frantic activity and agonizing waiting. While the authorities built their case, Maya and I continued our own investigation, determined to leave no stone unturned. On the surface, life went on as normal. I attended family dinners, nodding and smiling as my father boasted about his latest deals. I sat through board meetings, watching as Daniel preened and postured, secure in his position as the heir apparent. All the while, I was hyper-aware of every glance, every subtle change in tone. Did they suspect? Had they discovered my betrayal? The stress was enormous. I lost weight, dark circles forming under my eyes despite my best efforts to conceal them. My mother, ever obsessed with appearances, cornered me one day. "You look dreadful, Clara," she said, her voice a mixture of concern and disapproval. "People will talk. Here, use this concealer. And for heaven's sake, eat something. Your skin and bones." I wanted to scream, to shake her and make her see the real issues at hand. Instead, I smiled tightly and promised to take better care of myself. The only respite came in my clandestine meetings with Maya. We'd meet in out-of-the-way cafes or secluded parks, poring over documents and planning our next moves. Maya's passion was infectious, her belief in the importance of our work unwavering. "We're going to change things, Clara," she'd say, her eyes shining with conviction. "Not just for your family, but for all the people they've hurt over the years. You're going to be a hero." Hero. The word felt foreign, almost laughable. I didn't feel like a hero. Most days, I felt like a fraud, playing a part in a drama I didn't fully understand. But Maya's faith in me gave me strength, pushing me forward when I wanted nothing more than to run and hide. As the FBI's investigation progressed, we knew the endgame was approaching. But my father, ever the master strategist, had one more move to play. The announcement came at another lavish family dinner. My father stood at the head of the table, glass raised in a toast. "I have wonderful news," he proclaimed, his voice booming through the dining room. "We're selling the estate. It's time for a new chapter, a chance to expand our horizons." The estate. My childhood home. The one place that still held happy memories amidst all the pain. I felt the blood drain from my face as my father continued, outlining plans for a massive new development that would erase every trace of our family's history. As the rest of the family cheered, I caught my father watching me, a calculating look in his eyes. In that moment I understood. This wasn't just a business move. It was a message to me. He was telling me that he could erase anything, even our past, if it suited his purposes. That night, as I lay awake in my childhood bedroom for what might be the last time, I made my final decision. It was time to act, to bring everything we'd uncovered into the light. Whatever the consequences, I couldn't let my father destroy the last piece of our true legacy. The next morning I called Maya. "It's time," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to end this now." As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The die was cast. In a matter of days, everything would change. And I, Clara Bennett, would be at the center of the storm. The plan was set in motion with the precision of a well-conducted orchestra. Maya would publish her exposé, a comprehensive account of the Bennett family's crimes backed by the evidence we'd gathered. Simultaneously, I would confront my father at the annual shareholders' meeting, laying bare the truth in front of the very people he'd spent years deceiving. The day of reckoning dawned bright and clear, a beautiful day for the end of an empire. I dressed with care, choosing a sharp suit that felt like armor. As I fastened my grandmother's necklace, a simple pearl pendant that had always given me strength, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was a stranger, her eyes hard with determination, her posture straight and unafraid. The shareholders' meeting was held in a grand hotel ballroom, all gilt and crystal designed to impress. I sat quietly as my father gave his usual self-aggrandizing speech, watching the rapt faces of the audience. How many of them, I wondered, suspected the rot beneath the golden facade? When it was time for questions, I stood, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I have something to say," I announced, the microphone carrying my words across the suddenly silent room. My father's face, projected on large screens around the room, showed a flicker of confusion that quickly morphed into anger. "Clara, this isn't the time." "I think it's exactly the time." I cut him off, stepping into the center aisle. For years, this company has built its reputation on lies and exploitation. Today, I'm here to expose the truth. What followed was a blur of accusations and revelations. I laid out the evidence of fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion, my voice growing stronger with each damning fact. I watched as the color drained from my father's face, as my mother's perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat in shock. Daniel tried to intervene, rushing towards me with fury in his eyes. But he was too late. The damage was done. As security guards approached, uncertain whether to remove me or protect me, I saw phones lighting up all around the room. Maya's article had dropped, perfectly timed to coincide with my revelation. The next few hours were chaos. Reporters swarmed the hotel. Shareholders demanded answers. And I found myself at the eye of the storm. Through it all, I held my ground, repeating my accusations to anyone who would listen. It wasn't until late that night, exhausted and emotionally drained, that the full impact of what I'd done hit me. Sitting in Maya's apartment, watching the news coverage of my family's downfall, I felt a strange mix of relief, grief, and fear. "You did it, Clara," Maya said softly, squeezing my hand. "You brought down an empire built on lies, I thought. An empire that had crushed countless lives in its relentless pursuit of wealth and power. And yet, as I watched my father being led away in handcuffs, as I saw the shock and betrayal on my mother's face, I couldn't help but mourn for the family I'd never truly had. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. As I drifted off to sleep, my dreams were haunted by the challenges that lay ahead. The legal battles, the media scrutiny, the long process of rebuilding my life from the ashes of my family's legacy. But for the first time in years, I slept without the weight of secrets on my chest. Whatever came next, I would face it with the truth as my shield. The weeks following my whistleblowing were a whirlwind of legal depositions, press conferences, and the monumental task of unraveling the web of corruption my family had woven. The Bennett name, once synonymous with luxury and success, was now dragged through the mud, our dirty laundry aired for all to see. My father fought back with everything he had, hiring a team of high-powered lawyers to counter every accusation. But the evidence was overwhelming. As more former employees came forward, emboldened by my stand, the true extent of the corruption became clear. My mother, in a move that surprised even me, filed for divorce. I watched from afar as she reinvented herself as a victim, claiming ignorance of my father's crimes. It was almost admirable, the way she managed to garner public sympathy, painting herself as a naive socialite led astray by her husband's ambition. Daniel was another story entirely. Faced with the prospect of serious jail time, he cracked, turning on our father in exchange for a lighter sentence. The look of betrayal on my father's face, as Daniel testified against him, was something I'll never forget. As for me, I found myself in the strange position of being both a pariah and a hero. Former colleagues reached out, some to offer support, others to beg for leniency as the investigation widened. The media couldn't get enough of my story. The dutiful daughter turned whistleblower, bringing down her own family's corrupt empire. But amidst the chaos, I found purpose. With Maya's help, I established a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of financial exploitation and corporate fraud. We used a portion of the recovered assets to provide legal aid, financial counseling, and support for whistleblowers facing retaliation. It wasn't an easy road. There were days when the weight of what I'd done threatened to crush me. Nights when I lay awake, wondering if I'd made the right choice. The death threats continued, forcing me to live under constant security. The stress took its toll, leaving me exhausted and often questioning my own motivations. But then I'd receive a letter from someone we'd helped, thanking us for giving them the courage to speak out against injustice. Or I'd see a news report about corporate reforms sparked by our revelations. In those moments, I knew that despite the personal cost, I had done the right thing. Months turned into years. The legal battles dragged on, but slowly justice was served. My father was sentenced to decades in prison, his empire dismantled and its assets seized. The family estate, which had once symbolized all that was rotten in our legacy, was transformed into a community center, its grounds open to the public for the first time in generations. As the dust began to settle, I found myself at a crossroads. The whistleblower label, which had defined me for so long, began to feel constraining. I was more than my family's crimes, more than the scandal that had consumed my life. It was time to figure out who Clara Bennett really was, outside of the shadow of the Bennett name. With a sense of trepidation and excitement, I enrolled in law school, determined to use my experiences to fight for corporate accountability and whistleblower protection. It was a new chapter, a chance to build something positive from the ashes of my family's legacy. As I sat in my first lecture, surrounded by students who knew my story but didn't yet know me, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but for the first time in my life, I was truly free to chart my own course. The Bennett Empire had fallen, but from its ruins, something new and potentially beautiful was beginning to grow. 5 years after the fall of the Bennett Empire, I stood at the podium, addressing a room full of aspiring lawyers and business students. My guest lecture on corporate ethics and the importance of whistleblower protection had become an annual event, a reminder of how far I'd come and how much work still lay ahead. As I fielded questions from the audience, I caught sight of a familiar face slipping into the back of the lecture hall. Daniel, looking older and more subdued than I remembered, met my gaze with a mixture of apprehension and hope. After the lecture, we met in a quiet corner of the campus cafe. The years of separation and the weight of our shared history hung between us like a tangible thing. "You look good, Clara," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been following your work. The foundation, the legal reforms, you're really making a difference." I studied my brother, noting the lines of stress around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands as he clutched his coffee cup. "Thank you," I replied cautiously. "How have you been, Daniel?" What followed was a conversation years in the making. Daniel spoke of his time in prison, of the hard lessons learned and the long road to redemption. He was working now, he told me, at a nonprofit focused on rehabilitating white-collar criminals. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his eyes meeting mine. "For everything. The bullying, the betrayal. I was so caught up in being the golden child, in living up to Dad's expectations, that I lost sight of what really mattered." I felt a lump form in my throat. The anger and resentment I'd carried for so long began to soften, replaced by a bittersweet understanding. "We were both victims of that toxic environment," I said softly. "But we also made our own choices." We talked for hours, rebuilding the bridge between us one painful confession at a time. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As we parted ways, Daniel hesitated, then pulled me into a fierce hug. "I'm proud of you, sis," he whispered. "You're the best of us. Always have been." That night, as I lay in bed reflecting on the day's events, I thought about the long journey that had brought me to this point. The pain, the betrayal, the moments of doubt. They had all shaped me, forging me into the woman I was now. I thought of my parents, my father serving his sentence, my mother living in exile, her social star long since faded. I thought of the victims whose lives had been forever altered by my family's greed, and of the small ways our foundation was working to make amends. Most of all, I thought about the future. The battles still to be fought, the reforms still to be made. The world of corporate finance was still a minefield of ethical challenges, but now I had the tools and the platform to make a real difference. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The Bennett legacy was no longer a burden to be escaped, but a responsibility to be shouldered. A chance to turn generations of harm into a force for good. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to fight for what was right. And I, Clara Bennett, was ready to face them head-on. 10 years to the day after I first blew the whistle on my family's corrupt empire, I stood on the steps of the Capitol, surrounded by a sea of supporters and fellow activists. The Whistleblower Protection Act of 2035, a piece of legislation I had helped draft and champion, had just been signed into law. As the crowd cheered and cameras flashed, I felt a profound sense of completion. This wasn't just a professional victory. It was the culmination of a personal journey that had begun in the opulent halls of the Bennett estate and led me here, to the heart of change. The act wasn't perfect. No law ever is. but it represented a significant step forward in protecting those who dared to speak truth to power. It expanded protections for corporate whistleblowers, increased penalties for retaliation, and established a fund to support individuals who risked everything to expose wrongdoing. As I made my way through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging words of congratulation, I caught sight of Maya. My old friend and ally was now a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, her exposés continuing to shake the foundations of corporate America. She grinned and gave me a thumbs up, mouthing "We did it," over the noise of the crowd. Later that evening, at a small gathering of friends and supporters, I found a moment of quiet reflection. I thought about the long road that had brought me here. The nights spent poring over financial records, the fear and uncertainty of those early days as a whistleblower, the grueling work of rebuilding my life, and my reputation from the ground up. I thought about my family too. My father, still in prison, his empire nothing but a cautionary tale in business ethics courses. My mother, who had eventually found a measure of peace in a quiet life away from the spotlight. And Daniel, who had become an unexpected ally in the fight for corporate accountability, his own experiences lending weight to our cause. As I raised a glass to toast the new law, I felt a surge of gratitude for every person who had supported me along the way. The lawyers who had taken a chance on a disgraced heiress with a law degree, the activists who had welcomed me into their fold, the countless whistleblowers whose stories had fueled my determination to create lasting change. But most of all, I felt grateful for the strength I had found within myself. The quiet, bookish girl who had never quite fit into the glittering world of the Bennetts had become a force to be reckoned with, a voice for those who had been silenced by greed and corruption. As the night wore on and guests began to depart, Maya pulled me aside. "So what's next for Clara Bennett?" she asked, a twinkle in her eye. "Saving the world, I assume?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "One law at a time," I replied. "There's still so much work to do." And there was. The world of high finance was still a battlefield of ethical dilemmas and corporate malfeasance. But now, armed with the law, my experiences, and a network of dedicated allies, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As I left the party and stepped out into the cool night air, I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. The Bennett heiress was long gone, replaced by something far more powerful. A woman who had faced her demons, spoken her truth, and emerged stronger for it. I, Clara Bennett, whistleblower, advocate and agent of change, was ready to write the next chapter of my story. And this time, it would be on my own terms. The future, with all its uncertainties and possibilities, beckoned, and I was ready to answer its call.